Hare Krishna. Uh,
Yeah, Hare Krishna,
is
Prabhu.
my slide visible?
Yes, visible, Prabhu.
Okay, so my voice audible.
Yes, audible, very clear.
Okay, so we'll start with the Mangalacharan.
Yeah, sure.
Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Chakshurumiltam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Taptam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayan Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Sri Guru Sri Utapatakamanam Sri Guru Vaishnavamsha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunathan Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paljana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Sri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpati Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namuste तप्त कांचना गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय Hare Krishna. So today's session is titled Virāt-Rūpa, Universal Form. So last week our session was titled Mahatattva. Then the week before that we were looking at Prakriti, material nature. So even in that chapter, Prakriti, we actually saw aspects related to Mahatattva and Virāt-Rūpa. But that was quite surface level. But we saw regarding Mahatattva in detail last week. So today we'll be looking at Virāt-Rūpa in depth. And also we'll see how this Virāt-Rūpa is actually related to the Mahatattva in terms of the process of creation. So out of the 5 core subject matters of Gita, we are still dealing with the third one, Prakriti, material nature. So just a simple recap about what we covered last week regarding the Mahatattva. We saw the 24 elements which serve as the raw materials or ingredients for creation. The 5 gross elements, the Panchamahabhut, the 5 subtle elements, the sense objects like form, taste, smell, touch, sound. Then we also have the 5 Jnana Indriya, 5 Karma Indriya, and the 11th sense, which is the mind. And so, but excluding the mind, we have actually 20. So the remaining 4 are mind, intelligence, false ego, and consciousness. So these are the elements which we covered last week in the topic regarding Mahatattva. And for today's topic also, we'll see how these ingredients were actually used in the second stage of creation, because Mahatattva represents the primary or preliminary stage of creation, and the Virāt-Rūpa or universal form actually deals with the secondary stage, which accepts the 24 elements for further creation. As we know, in Gita, there is one chapter titled Vishwarupa Darshana Yoga, which is chapter 11, where Krishna reveals the universal form to Arjuna. When Arjuna requests him to do so, in chapter 11, the entire chapter is regarding the Virāt-Rūpa. However, in chapter 9 itself, there are some hints or some brief descriptions related to the universal form, starting from the 4th verse in chapter 9. Actually, from this series of verses, we'll see that in the 15th verse, the universal form is mentioned, like before going into the details of the universal form in chapter 11, Krishna gives a slight hint about the universal form in chapter 9 itself. So in 9.4, Krishna says, by me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I'm not in them. Also, a very important point regarding this universal form, it refers to the universal form is like a personification of the universe. As we know, when we were talking about Mahatattva last week, we were referring to Mahavishnu and how innumerable universes are created out of his breathing in his Yoga Nidra. So there are innumerable universes which emanate from the pores of the body of Mahavishnu. And then for each universe, Garbhotakashai Vishnu is the chief of each universe, in which we have Lord Brahma and all the other 14 planetary systems. So when we talk about the Virāt-Rūpa or universal form, it actually refers to every single universe, in which Garbhotakashai Vishnu is the topmost entity. And in 9.5, Krishna says, and yet everything that is created does not rest in me. Behold my mystic opulence. Although I am the maintainer of all living entities, and although I am everywhere, I'm not a part of this cosmic manifestation. For myself is the very source of creation. So here we can clearly see that Krishna is telling about his Swayam-Rūpa originating from the spiritual sky, and Mahavishnu himself is an avatar of Krishna, and Garbhotakashai Vishnu also is an avatar of Mahavishnu. So if we look at the hierarchy, it might seem like Garbhotakashai Vishnu, who represents the Virāt-Rūpa of each universe, it might seem like his position is like quite minute compared to the Swayam-Rūpa of Krishna. However, these are all plenary expansions. And in 9.6, Krishna says, understand that as the mighty wind blowing everywhere rests always in the sky, all created beings rest in me. So when the Prakriti is manifest, all living entities come into being and they start to engage in activities. However, after annihilation, all the living entities rest within the Supreme Lord. And in 9.7, O son of Kunti, at the end of the millennium, all material manifestations enter into my nature, and at the beginning of another millennium, by my potency, I create them again. So even in chapter 14, there's a verse, I think in the fourth verse, Sarva Yoni Sakanteya Multeya Sambhavantiya, Tasham Brahma Mahad Yoni Am Bija Pradapida. So when Prakriti gets manifested, it is Garbhotakashai Vishnu who impregnates Prakriti with all the living entities who rested within him in the previous, after the previous annihilation. Garbhotakashai Vishnu impregnates material nature or Prakriti with all the living entities so that they all become animate and manifest to engage in karma or material activities for the next duration of the entire creation until the next annihilation. The whole cosmic order is under me. Under my will, it is automatically manifested again and again. And under my will, it is annihilated at the end. So it all begins at his will, and it also ends at his will. O Dhananjaya, all this work cannot bind me. I am ever detached from all these material activities, seated as though neutral. So we as living entities, we are forced to engage in karma or material activities due to the influence of the three modes of material nature. And out of the three, we, especially as human beings, we are very, we are dominated mostly by the mode of passion. And that's why we are often engaged in a lot of fruitive activities. So it is we who are dominated by the modes, but the Supreme Lord is the source of the three modes. So the three modes act as puppeteers who control the living entities. And since those modes originate from the Lord, they cannot, they have no effect on the Lord himself. This material nature, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings. Under its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So here Krishna says this material nature, which is one of my energies, meaning he's referring to material nature as his inferior material energy. We know that Krishna also has his superior spiritual energy. And we as conditioned souls, we are caught in between the two as marginal, as part of the marginal energy. Fools deride me when I design in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature as the Supreme Lord of all that be. So here the keyword is transcendental nature, meaning the nature of the Supreme Lord is that of transcendence, which is beyond everything else. It's free from dualities and all other aspects which are related to the material world. We are caught in this material world and we are being subject to dualities. And as long as we are within this material world, we'll always be subject to dualities. But in the spiritual world, we can be free from all those dualities like profit, loss, happiness, distress. So it is clearly explained in chapter 15 on Purushottam Yoga about how the Supreme Person or Purushottam is beyond everything else. And in that chapter, this transcendental nature of the Supreme Person is explained. However, since we are being conditioned souls in this material world, we always tend to judge the Supreme Person who is transcendental based on our perspective, which is materially contaminated. In most of Prabhupada's purports and also his small books, he gives this analogy about this frog in the well mentality. So according to that analogy, when the frog in a well is told about the sea or the ocean, the frog tends to think about the ocean in terms of how big is the ocean compared to the well. So that is the frog mentality, and therefore most of these so-called rationalists and atheists, they always try to judge the Supreme Lord, and they tend to set the criteria or benchmarks for the Supreme Lord, not knowing that we as conditioned souls, due to our material contamination, we are in no position to judge. We are actually in no position to judge even another human being. So who are we to judge or set criteria to evaluate the Supreme Lord? Those who are thus bewildered are attracted by demoniac and atheistic views. In that deluded condition, their hopes for liberation, their fruitive activities, and their culture of knowledge are all defeated. So this tendency to always set benchmark criteria to judge about how the Supreme Lord should look or behave, it is all due to the demoniac and atheistic nature. However, those who are always caught in that nature will only be trapped in the material world as long as they are not enlightened. But in most cases, they don't wish to be enlightened. O son of Pritha, those who are not deluded, the great souls, are under the protection of the divine nature. They are fully engaged in devotional service because they know me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, original and inexhaustible. Always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me, These great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. Others who engage in sacrifice by the cultivation of knowledge worship the Supreme Lord as the one without a second, as diverse in many, and in the universal form. So those who are properly situated in devotional service, they worship Krishna as according to his Virāt-Rūpa, the two-handed form of Krishna, without speculating any other impersonal features. They focus on the personality of Godhead. However, others also tend to focus on other personal features of Krishna. Like here, Krishna himself gives like three types of features which are also related to the personal feature. Like in 9.15, it's stated, others worship the Supreme Lord as the one without a second. That is according to the worship, according to the original personality of Godhead. Next is as diverse in many and in the universal form. These three features are actually related to the personal feature of the Lord. So in verse 9.15, we saw that there is a hint regarding the universal form. This verse is the summary of the previous verses. The Lord tells Arjuna that those who are purely in Krishna consciousness and do not know anything other than Krishna are called Mahatma. Yet there are other persons who are not exactly in the position of Mahatma, but who worship Krishna also in different ways. Some of them have already been described as the distressed, the financially destitute, the inquisitive, and those who are engaged in the cultivation of knowledge. So these four type of people were described in 7.16, chapter 7, verse number 16. Chaturvida bhajante mam jana sukirtana arjuna artho jignasu artharati jnani cha bhartarshava. Krishna says that four types of people worship him. The distressed, those who are looking for material wealth, those who are inquisitive, and also the jnanis. But there are others who are still lower, and these are divided into three. He who worships himself as one with the Supreme Lord, he who concocts some form of the Supreme Lord and worships that, and he who accepts the universal form, the Vishwarupa of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and worships that. So these three types of worship are described as lower compared to the pure devotees who belong to the four categories described in 7.16. Actually, in chapter 7, after verse 16, Krishna also says that all four categories of those devotees are Mahatmas, but Krishna especially prefers the Jnanis as the topmost of the four categories of Mahatmas. However, apart from those four categories of Mahatmas, there are three categories of people who do have some form of faith in the Supreme Lord. However, they are considered lower than the four types of pure devotees, because these people tend to worship according to these three ways. Number one, to worship himself as one with the Supreme Lord, he who concocts some form of the Supreme Lord, and he who accepts the universal form and worship that. Out of the above three, the lowest, those who worship themselves as the Supreme Lord, thinking themselves to be monis, are most predominant. So these are the people who always misunderstand the true purport behind Aham Brahmasmi. As we know, there are many sutras or aphorisms in various scriptures which say that Aham Brahmasmi, Sarvam Idam Kalu Brahmam, or even in the first sutra of Brahma Sutra or Vedanta Sutra starts with Atato Brahma Jignasa. So there's a lot of misunderstanding regarding the term Brahman in these various scriptures. Those who are too obsessed with the aphorism of Aham Brahmasmi, they tend to think that Aham Brahmasmi simply means that I'm God. However, that is due to poor understanding, because uh, living entities are also considered Brahman, it doesn't mean that the living entity is equal to the Param Brahman. Because in Gita itself, in chapter 10, 10.12, Arjuna says, Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram Paramam Bhavan, Purusham Shaswatam Divyam, Adi Devam Ajam Vibhum. So Param Brahma, meaning Arjuna regards Krishna as Param Brahma, the supreme Brahman. So when the living entities are described as Brahman, it simply means that living entities are part and parcel of the supreme Brahman. Just because the label appears to be equal, that doesn't mean that living entities are equal to the supreme. It's just that we are part and parcel of the Param Brahma. That's why we are also regarded as Brahman. However, it's not that we are equal. We are actually part and parcel of the supreme. But those who misinterpret, for example, like Aham Brahmasmi, they tend to think that they themselves are the Supreme Lord, which is totally a very false notion. So such people think themselves to be the Supreme Lord, and in this mentality, they worship themselves. This is also a type of God worship, for they can understand that they are not the material body, but are actually spiritual soul. At least such a sense is prominent. Generally, the impersonalists worship the Supreme Lord in this way. The second class includes the worshippers of the demigods, those who by imagination consider any form to be the form of the Supreme Lord. And the third class includes those who cannot conceive of anything beyond the manifestation of this material universe. They consider the universe to be the supreme organism or entity and worship that. The universe is also a form of the Lord. So all these three types of worship are also related to features which can be associated with the personal form of Krishna. However, as Krishna himself has recommended in chapter 12 of the Gita on Bhakti Yoga, to worship Krishna, as he himself has said in the second verse of chapter 12, it is best to worship the two-handed form of Shyam That would be the best method of worship, rather than worshipping ourselves in the guise of Aham Brahmasmi, or to worship demigods, or even to worship the universal form. So as we know in chapter 11 of Gita, Arjuna, in the beginning of the chapter, Arjuna requests Krishna to reveal the universal form to him, because in chapter 10, Krishna gives a long list of his opulences. So Arjuna becomes more curious to see for himself all those opulences. However, he does not request Krishna, like he does not challenge Krishna to show the universal form. He requests Krishna with full faith, and he requests him very humbly, because in the first verse of the chapter itself, Arjuna says, by my hearing the instructions you have kindly given me about these most confidential spiritual subjects, my illusion has now been dispelled. O lotus-eyed one, I've heard from you in detail about the appearance and disappearance of every living entity, and I've realized your inexhaustible glories. O greatest of all personalities, O supreme form, though I see you here before me in your actual position, meaning Arjuna accepts Krishna's form as the Virāt-Rūpa, as you have described yourself. I wish to see how you have entered into this cosmic manifestation. I want to see that form of yours. So here, Arjuna is having this mood of like a curious student. He wants to know how the process is conducted, of how Krishna provides the entire creation. So Arjuna requests humbly by saying, if you think that I am able to behold your cosmic form, O my Lord, O Master of all mystic power, then kindly show me that unlimited universal self. So Arjuna does not challenge Krishna. He is humbly requesting, and he's saying, if you think that I'm able to behold your cosmic form, kindly show me that universal form. So in Gita, there's this description regarding the universal form based on how Arjuna saw it. And we also know that Sanjaya was also able to see what Arjuna was seeing, and he was describing based on his vision to Dhritarashtra. Now back to our topic, which is also related to the topic of last week. Last week we saw the topic on Mahatattva, which is like the preliminary or primary process of creation. And the creation of every universe is like a subsequent process which follows the process of creation in the Mahatattva. So in the second canto of Bhagavatam, the last chapter, which is chapter 10 of the second canto, Shukadeva Goswami talks about the 10 subject matters of Bhagavatam. So in Gita, we have 5 core subject matters: Ishvara, Jiva, Prakriti, Kala, Karma. And in Bhagavatam, there are 10 principal subject matters. These are listed in the first verse of the 10th chapter, which is the last chapter of the second canto. Sri Sukha Vacha, Atra Sargo Visargascha Stanam Poshanamutaya Manvantare Shanukada Nirodho Muktirashraya. Sri Sukadev Goswami said, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are 10 divisions of statements regarding the following: the creation of the universe, sub-creation, planetary systems, protection by the Lord, the creative impetus, the change of Manus, the signs of God, returning home back to Godhead, liberation, and the summum bonum. So here the first 2 subject matters are Sarga, Visarga. Sarga refers to creation, Visarga refers to sub-creation. So the first process is related to the second process, similar to what we saw last week. And today we'll be looking at the subsequent process which follows. So in this chapter 10 of the second canto, the entire the 10 subject matters are explained quite briefly, and we will also see the link between creation and sub-creation as it's explained in this chapter. To isolate the transcendence of the summum bonum, the symptoms of the rest are described sometimes by Vedic inference, sometimes by direct explanation, and sometimes by summary explanations given by the great sages. So apart from those 10 subject matters, there are also other information in Bhagavatam which are described by the sages using various methods. The elementary creation of 16 items of matter, namely the 5 elements, the 5 gross elements, followed by the subtle elements, the senses, is known as Sarga, whereas subsequent resultant interaction of the modes of material nature is called Visarga. So whatever we saw last week, those processes are part of Sarga, which is the first phase of creation. Beyond that, using the output of those processes of Sarga, Visarga happens, that is sub-creation. So that's how the 2 topics of last week and today's topic are related. The right situation for the living entities is to obey the laws of the Lord and thus be in perfect peace of mind under the protection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Manus and their laws are meant to give right direction in life. The impetus for activity is the desire for fruitive work. So as mentioned earlier, we as conditioned souls, especially we human beings, we are caught in this material world due to our tendency to always be engaged in fruitive work, since we are prone to being dominated by predominantly by the mode of passion. The science of God describes the incarnations of the personality of Godhead and his different activities together with the activities of his great devotees. So as we know, in the first canto of Bhagavatam, chapter 3, titled Krishna and his Krishna is the source of all incarnations. So in that chapter, there's this list of 22 incarnations of Krishna described in that chapter. However, in the second canto also, Lord Brahma describes, again, he describes the list of incarnations to Narada Muni. He also describes those incarnations a bit more in detail in the 7th chapter of second canto. It's titled Scheduled Incarnations of the Supreme Lord. So in these first two cantos, the incarnations are described in quite brief, but throughout the entire Bhagavatam, the 12 cantos of Bhagavatam, we'll be seeing all the incarnations in much greater detail and how all those incarnations were interacting with the great devotees. Like in the Narsingh Leela, we can also see the interaction between Narsinghadev and Prahlad Maharaj. The merging of the living entity along with his conditional living tendency with the mystic lying down of the Mahavishnu, meaning the Yoganitra, is called the winding up of the cosmic manifestation. Liberation is the permanent situation of the form of the living entity after he gives up the changeable, gross, and subtle material bodies. So to be liberated from this material world, we have to get rid of all material designations, like not just the gross body, all material designations. We have to free ourselves completely from all sorts of material contamination. The Supreme One, who is celebrated as the Supreme Soul, is the supreme source of the cosmic manifestation, as well as its reservoir and winding up. Thus, he is the supreme fountainhead, the absolute truth. The individual person possessing different instruments of senses is called the Adhyatmic person, and the individual controlling deity of the senses is called Adi Devi. The embodiment seen on the eyeballs is called the Adi Bhautik person. So here there are three features which describe the creation in this material world. First is Adhyatmic. Adhyatmic refers to the living entities. Adi Devic refers to demigods. Adi Bhautik refers to the Prakriti, the material elements related to the material nature. All three of the above mentioned stages of different living entities are interdependent. In the absence of one, another is not understood. But the Supreme Being, who sees every one of them as the shelter of the shelter, is independent of all, and therefore he is the supreme shelter. So from here, it's clearly stated that we as the Adhyatmic living entities, we are dependent on the Adi Devic demigods and also the Adi Bhautik forces, the force of material nature. We ourselves are dependent upon the other two. And yet, we always have this tendency to judge the Supreme Being who is independent of everything. That is the result of the material contamination that we have accumulated. After separating the different universes, the gigantic universal form of the Lord Mahavishnu, which came out of the causal ocean, the place of appearance for the first Purusha avatar, entered into each of the separate universes, desiring to lie on the created transcendental water, Garbhodaka. So Mahavishnu, being the first Purusha avatar, expands further into the second Purusha avatar, which is Garbhodakashayi Vishnu, to create each separate universe. That supreme person is not impersonal and therefore is distinctively a Nara or person. Therefore, the transcendental water created from the supreme Nara is known as Nara, and because he lies down on that water, he is known as Narayana. So the supreme Nara or Nara who takes shelter in water is known as Narayana. one should definitely know that all material ingredients, activities, time, and modes, and the living entities who are meant to enjoy them all exist by his mercy only. And as soon as he does not care for them, everything becomes non existent. So, as mentioned earlier, the creation and annihilation, everything happens by his will. Also, in last week's discussion regarding the verses from third canto related to the Mahatattva elements, we also saw in one of Prabhupada's purports that which said that the Supreme Lord creates this material world simply to accommodate conditioned souls who are like children who want to play with toys. We as the contaminated, materially contaminated souls, we have material desires, and therefore our Supreme Father created this material world as a toy for us to play with. However, our condition is such that we don't know that this material nature is actually it's not that we are exploiting the material nature. The material nature is exploiting us, and due to we being oblivious to that fact, we tend to be trapped in this vicious cycle of Janma Mritu Jara Vyadi. The Lord, while lying on his bed of mystic slumber, generated the seminal symbol golden in hue through external energy out of his desire to manifest varieties of living entities from himself alone. Just hear from me how the potency of his lordship divides one into three, called the controlling deity, controlling entities, the controlled entities, and the material bodies in the manner mentioned above. So as we saw earlier, we saw these three elements called Adhyatmic, Adi Devik, Adi Bhautik. So here the controlling entities are the Adi Devik demigods. Controlled entities are actually the living entities, the Adhyatmic entities, and the material bodies are the Adi Bhautik part of material nature. From the sky situated within the transcendental body of the manifesting Mahavishnu, sense energy, mental force, and bodily strength are all generated, as well as the sum total of the fountainhead of the total living force. As the followers of a king follow their lord, similarly, when the total energy is in motion, all other living entities move, and when the total energy stops endeavoring, all other living entities stop sensual activities. So this simply means that creation and annihilation all take place at his will. The living force being agitated by the Virat Purusha generated hunger and thirst, and when he desired to drink and eat, the mouth opened. From the mouth, the palate became manifested, and thereupon the tongue was also generated. After this, all the different tastes came into existence so that the tongue can release them. So from the previous verses, we can clearly see how there are descriptions regarding Mahavishnu, Mahatattva, and now it has come to this description regarding the Virat Purusha, who represents the universal form. When the Supreme desired to speak, speeches were vibrated from the mouth. Then the controlling deity fire was generated from the mouth. But when he was lying in the water, all these functions remained suspended. So we saw that the 24 elements of the Mahatattva, they were the raw elements, like it all started with sound, and then air, fire. So those were the raw elements. And when the universes were created, when the universal form was created, for each of those elements, there was a presiding deity. Like fire is a raw element, one of the 24 elements, but there is a presiding deity who is created when the Virāt-Rūpa is created. So that's how these processes are interrelated. First, all the raw materials were created, as what we saw in last week's session. So now it is a subsequent process which actually uses the outputs from the processes which we saw from last week. Thereafter, when the Supreme Purusha desired to smell odors, the nostrils and respiration were generated, the nasal instrument and odors came into existence, and the controlling deity of air carrying smell also became manifested. Again, the raw element of air also has its presiding deity. Thus, when everything existed in darkness, the Lord desired to see himself and all that was created. Then the eyes, the illuminating God, sun, the power of vision, and the object of sight all became manifested. Again, the element, the subtle element, form, the sense, this is the jnana indriya of the eyes, are also related to the presiding deity of the sun god. By development of the desire of the great sages to know the ears, the power of hearing, the controlling deity of hearing, and the objects of hearing became manifested. The great sages desire to hear about the self. Again, here also we can see the elements from the 24 elements like ears, sound. When there was a desire to perceive the physical characteristics of matter, such as softness, hardness, warmth, cold, lightness, and heaviness, the background of sensation, the skin pores, the hairs on the body, and their controlling deities, the trees were generated. Within and outside the skin is a covering of air through which sense perception became prominent. Again, the raw materials from the 24 elements were being used to create the presiding deities as part of the universal form. Thereafter, when the Supreme Person desired to perform varieties of work, the two hands and their controlling strength, and Indra, the demigod in heaven, became manifested, as also the acts dependent on both the hands and the demigod. So even the hands are part of the karma indriyas, the 5 karma indriyas. Thereupon, because of his desiring to control movement, his legs became manifested. Again, legs are also part of the karma indriyas. And from the legs, the controlling deity named Vishnu was generated. By his personal supervision of this act, all varieties of human beings are busily engaged in beautiful occupational sacrifice. So up to this point, we can clearly see how when the Virāt-Rūpa is being created, every part of the Virāt-Rūpa is occupied by, it consists of a presiding deity, and each of the presiding deity is associated with one of the 24 elements which you saw last week. So they are all interrelated. Thereupon, for sexual pleasure, begetting offspring, and tasting heavenly nectar, the Lord developed the genitals, and thus there is the genital organ and its controlling deity, the Prajapati. Again, the genitals are also referred to as one of the karma indriya. The object of sexual pleasure and the controlling deity are under the control of the genitals of the Lord. Thereafter, when he desired to evacuate the refuse of eatables, the evacuating hole, anus, and the sensory organ thereof developed along with the controlling deity Mitra. Again, the organ of evacuation is also part of the karma indriya. The sensory organ and the evacuating substance are both under the shelter of the controlling deity. Thereafter, when he desired to move from one body to another, the navel and the air of departure of death were combinedly created. The navel is the shelter for both, namely death and the separating force. When there was a desire to have food and drink, the abdomen and the intestines and also the arteries became manifested. The rivers and seas are the source of their sustenance and metabolism. When there was a desire to think about the activities of his own energy, then the heart, the seat of the mind, the moon, determination, and all desire became manifested. So again, the elements out of the 24 elements are also being referred to here as part of the Virāt-Rūpa. The 7 elements of the body, namely the thin layer on the skin itself, the flesh, blood, fat, marrow, and bone, are all made of earth, water, and fire, whereas the life breath is produced by the sky, water, and air. So the Virāt-Rūpa itself requires all the raw materials which you saw from last week, the 24 elements. The sense organs are attached to the modes of material nature, and the modes of material nature are products of the false ego. The mind is subjected to all kinds of material experiences, happiness and distress, example, and the intelligence is the feature of the mind's deliberation. So here we can see the three features. So we have seen the five gross elements, five subtle elements, five jnana indriya, five karma indriya, and out of the remaining three are mentioned here: mind, intelligence, false ego. Thus, by all these, the external feature of the personality of Godhead is covered by gross forms such as those of planets, which were explained to you by me. In chapter 10 of the second canto, actually the conversation is between Shukadev Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj. So Shukadev Goswami is explaining all these details to Parikshit. Therefore, beyond this gross manifestation, there is a transcendental manifestation, finer than the finest form. It has no beginning, no intermediate stage, and no end. Therefore, it's beyond the limits of expression or mental speculation and is distinct from the material conception. Neither of the above forms of the Lord, as just described to you from the material angle of vision, is accepted by the pure devotees of the Lord who know him well. He, the personality of Godhead, manifests himself in a transcendental form, being the subject of his transcendental name, quality, pastimes, entourage, and transcendental variegatedness. Although he is unaffected by all such activities, he appears to be so engaged. So the Purusha avatars like Mahavishnu, Garbhodakasha Vishnu, and Shirodakasha Vishnu, they are all, they appear to be engaged in material affairs of the material world. However, they are just expansions of the Swayam-Rūpa of Krishna, and therefore Krishna, being the supreme personality of Godhead, is transcendental. Then the last few verses of chapter 10 of the second canto. O king, know from me that all living entities are created by the Supreme Lord according to their past deeds. This includes Brahma and his sons like Daksha, the periodical heads like Vaivasvata, Manu, the demigods like Indra, Chandra, and Varuna, the great sages like Bhrigu, Vyasa, and Vashishta, the inhabitants of Pitraloka and Siddhaloka, the Charanas, Gandharvas, Vidyadharas, Asuras, Yakshas, Kinnaras, and angels, the serpentines, the monkey-shaped Kim Purushas, the human beings, the inhabitants of Matraloka, the demons, Pishachas, ghost spirits, lunatics, and evil spirits, the good and evil stars, the goblins, the animals in the forest, the birds, the household animals, the reptiles, the mountains, the moving and standing living entities, the living entities born from embryos, from eggs, from perspiration, and from seeds, and all others, whether they be in the water, land, or sky, in happiness, in distress, or in mixed happiness and distress. All of them, according to their past deeds, are created by the Supreme Lord. As we know, we also saw this verse from Vishnu Purana, which describes the 84 lakh species for the living entities. Jalaja Navalakshani, Stavaram Lakshavimshati, Krimiyo Rutra Sankhya, Pakshinam Tasalakshanam, Trimsha Lakshani Pasava, Chatur Lakshani Manusha. Jalaja Navalakshani, 9 lakh aquatics, Stavaram Lakshavimshati, 20 lakh non-moving entities, Krimiyo Rutra Sankhya, 11 lakh insects and germs, Pakshinam Tasalakshanam, 10 lakh bird species, Trimsha Lakshani Pasava, 30 lakh quadrupeds or 4-legged animals, Chatur Lakshani Manusha, 4 lakh human species, total 84 lakh species. All these are created based on the previous deeds of the living entities. Therefore, in our current life, whatever we do, we are actually preparing for our next body. Hopefully, we regain our original spiritual body. So actually, in chapter 10 of the second canto, it kind of summarizes the 10 subject matters of Bhagavatam before going to in great detail in the other cantos. But even in the beginning of the second canto itself, Sukadev Goswami starts to explain regarding the creation of the material world to Parikshit Maharaj, in which there are some verses spoken by Sukadev Goswami regarding the Virāt-Rūpa. So in verse 24 of the first chapter of second canto, Shukadev Goswami explains this gigantic manifestation of the phenomenal material world as a whole is the personal body of the absolute truth, when the universal resultant past, present, and future of material time is experienced. The gigantic universal form of the personality of Godhead within the body of the universal shell, which is covered by sevenfold material elements, is the subject for the Virat conception. Persons who have realized it have studied that the planets known as Patala constitute the bottoms of the feet of the universal Lord, and the heels and the toes are the Rasatala planets, the ankles are the Mahatala planets, and his fangs constitute the Talatala planets. So the lower body of the universal form is described as belonging to, as representing the lower planetary systems, as Patala being at the bottom of the Lord's feet. The knees of the universal form are the planetary system of the name Sutala, and the two thighs are the Vitala and Atala planetary systems. The hips are Manitala, and outer space is the depression of his navel. The chest of the original personality of the Jasnic form is the luminary planetary system. His neck is the Mar planets. His mouth is the Janas planets, and his forehead is the Tapas planetary system. The topmost planetary system, known as Satyaloka, is the head of he who has 1,000 heads. So this Satyaloka is actually referring to Brahmaloka, the topmost planet of the 14 planetary systems where Lord Brahma resides. However, in some of the verses, it is also stated that Satyaloka refers to the spiritual world, which is beyond the material world. His arms are the demigods shaded by Indra. This we actually saw earlier also. The 10 directional sides are his ears, and physical sound is his sense of hearing. His nostrils are the two Ashwini Kumaras, and material fragrance is his sense of smell. His mouth is the blazing fire. So again, we can see how the 24 elements are connected to different parts of the Virāt-Rūpa. The sphere of outer space constitutes his eye pits, and the eyeball is the sun as the power of seeing. His eyelids are both the day and night, and in the movement of his eyebrows, Brahma and similar supreme personalities reside. His palate is the director of water, Varuna, and the juice or essence of everything is his tongue. They say that the Vedic hymns are the cerebral passage of the Lord, and his jaws of teeth are Yama, god of death, who punishes the sinners. The art of affection is his set of teeth, and the most luring illusory material energy is his smile. This great ocean of material creation is but the casting of his glance over us. So it is to be noted here, his jaws of teeth are Yama, god of death. In Gita chapter 11 also, Arjuna sees something similar. In 11.25, Arjuna says, O Lord of Lords, O refuge of the worlds, please be gracious to me. I cannot keep my balance, seeing thus your blazing death-like faces and awful teeth. In all directions I am bewildered. All the sons of Dhritarashtra, along with their allied kings, and Bhishma, Drona, Karna, and our chief soldiers also, are rushing into your fearful mouths, and some I see trapped with heads smashed between your teeth. In the description of the Virāt-Rūpa, the Virat Purusha's jaws of teeth are equated to Yama, the god of death, and Arjuna saw something similar in the Gita also. Now back to chapter 1 of the second canto. Modesty is the upper portion of his lips, hankering is his chin, religion is the breast of the Lord, and irreligion is his back. Brahmaji, who generates all living beings in the material world, is his genitals, and the Mitra Varnas are his two testicles. The ocean is his waist, and the hills and mountains are the stacks of his bones. O king, the rivers are the veins of the gigantic body, and the trees are hairs of his body, and the omnipotent air is his breath. The passing ages are his movements, and his activities are the reactions of the three modes of material nature. O best amongst the Kurus, meaning Shukadeva Goswami is addressing Parikshit Maharaj. The clouds which carry water are the hairs on his head. The terminations of days or nights are his dress. And the supreme cause of material creation is his intelligence. His mind is the moon, the reservoir of all changes. The principle of matter, Mahatattva, is the consciousness of the omnipresent Lord, as asserted by the experts, and Rudradeva is his ego. The horse, mule, camel, and elephant are his nails, and wild animals and all quadrupeds are situated in the belt zone of the Lord. Varieties of birds are indications of his masterful artistic sense. Manu, the father of mankind, is the emblem of his standard intelligence, and humanity is his residence. The celestial species of human beings, like the Gandharvas, Vidyadharas, Charanas, and angels, all represent his musical rhythm, and the demoniac soldiers are representation of his wonderful prowess. The Virat Purusha's face is the Brahmanas, his arms are the Kshatriyas, his thighs are the Vaishyas, and the Shudras are under the protection of his feet. All the worshipable demigods are also overtaken by him, and it is the duty of everyone to perform sacrifices with feasible goods to appease the Lord. So here the four varnas are being equated to different parts of the Virat Purusha. So something similar is also mentioned by Brahma to Narada in chapter 5 of the second canto. In 2.537, Brahma also tells Narada that the Brahmanas represent his mouth, the Kshatriyas his arms, the Vaishyas his thighs, and the Shudras are born of his legs. Then towards the end of the first chapter in second canto, Shukadeva Goswami tells Parikshit, I've thus explained to you the gross material generic conception or the personality of Godhead. One who seriously desires liberation concentrates his mind on this form of the Lord, because there's nothing more than this in the material world. One should concentrate his mind upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who alone distributes himself in so many manifestations, just as ordinary persons create thousands of manifestations in dreams. One must concentrate the mind on him, the only all blissful absolute truth. Otherwise, one will be misled and will cause his own degradation. So, as mentioned by Krishna himself in chapter 12 of the Gita in Bhakti Yoga, we should always focus our mind on the personal form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, on the two-handed Sham Sundar form. So in the first chapter of second canto, Shukadeva Goswami gave descriptions regarding the Virāt-Rūpa to Parikshit Maharaj. In the fifth chapter of second canto, actually in the fifth chapter and also in sixth chapter, we will find more detailed explanation regarding the Virāt-Rūpa, which is being described by Lord Brahma to Narada Muni. At the beginning of the chapter, actually Narada asked Lord Brahma about the cause of creation, because he's curious to know about how Brahma gets his creative prowess. Because Narada Muni says, whatever we can understand by the nomenclature, characteristics and features of a particular thing, superior, inferior, or equal, eternal or temporary, is not created from any source other than that of your lordship, thou so great. So here Narada Muni is referring to Brahma being the topmost entity who is very powerful in creation. Yet we are moved to wonder about the existence of someone more powerful than you when we think of your great austerities in perfect discipline, although your good self is so powerful in the matter of creation. So first, Narada Muni accepts that Brahma is he somewhat accepts Brahma is the all-powerful creator. However, he is curious to know about who is the object of Brahma's devotion after seeing the intense austerities performed by Brahma himself. To which Brahma replies to Narada. Brahma says in verse 12, I offer my obeisances and meditate upon Lord Krishna, Vasudeva, the personality of Godhead, whose invincible potency influences them, the less intelligent class of men, to call me the supreme controller. So there's always this misconception in our community that where people tend to equate Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh as equals. However, from the scriptures, we know that they are guna avatars who are expansions of the Virāt-Rūpa of Krishna. So Krishna, being the Supreme Personality of Godhead, created these guna avatars, where Brahma is the guna avatar for the mode of passion. Shiva is associated with the mode of ignorance, and Vishnu is associated with the mode of goodness. However, all these guna avatars are still related to the material qualities. That's why our object of devotion should be the transcendental supreme person, that is Krishna. Even the title for this chapter, chapter 5 of the second canto, is titled Cause of All Causes. From the Brahma Samhita also, we can recall Ishvara Paramakrishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadi Radi Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. So, though it appears like Brahma is the creator, but Brahma himself was created by Krishna. Then Brahma continues to explain to Narada, inspired by him only, I discover what is already created by him, Narayana, under his vision as the all-pervading supersoul, and I also am created by him only. Brahma himself acknowledges that he himself is a creation of Narayana. The Lord Mahavishnu, although lying in the causal ocean, came out of it and dividing himself as Hiranyagarbha, that is Garbhodakashai Vishnu, he entered into each universe and assumed the Virāt-Rūpa with thousands of legs, arms, mouth, heads, etc. Here, Brahma has actually started to describe the Virāt-Rūpa to Narada Muni. Great philosophers imagine that the complete planetary systems in the universe are displays of the different upper and lower limbs of the universal body of the Lord. So this is also something similar to what was described by Shukadeva Goswami in the first chapter. And also we can see similar descriptions in the Gita also, in verse 10 and 11 of the 11th chapter of Gita. Arjuna saw in that universal form unlimited mouths, unlimited eyes, unlimited wonderful visions. The form was decorated with many celestial ornaments and bore many divine upraised weapons. He wore celestial garlands and garments, and many divine scents were smeared over his body. All was wondrous, brilliant, unlimited, all expanding. If hundreds of thousands of suns were to rise at once into the sky, their radiance might resemble the effulgence of the Supreme Person in that universal form. At that time, Arjuna could see in the universal form of the Lord the unlimited expansions of the universe situated in one place, although divided into many, many thousands. So these are descriptions from Gita based on what Arjuna saw, which are also similar to what is being described by Shukadeva Goswami and Brahma in Bhagavatam 2nd canto. Then Brahma continues in verse 38, the lower planetary systems up to the limit of the earthly stratum are said to be situated in his legs. The middle planetary systems, beginning from Bhurloka, are situated in his navel, and the still higher planetary systems, occupied by the demigods and highly cultured sages and saints, are situated in the chest of the Supreme Lord. So these are the three divisions. Like though there are 14 planetary systems, they are often divided into three main divisions, like the lower, middle, and upper planetary systems. From the forefront of the chest up to the neck of the universal form of the Lord are situated the planetary systems named Janaloka and Tapaloka, whereas Satiloka, the topmost planetary system, is situated on the head of the form. The spiritual planets, however, are eternal. So these are the upper planetary systems. My dear son Narada, know from me that there are 7 lower planetary systems out of the total 14. The first planetary system, known as Atala, is situated on the waist. So it is going from waist downwards. The second Vitala is situated on the thighs. The third Sutala on the knees. The fourth Talatala on the hands. The fifth Mahatala on the ankles. The sixth Rasatala on the upper portion of the feet. And the seventh Patala on the soles of the feet. So Rasatala is on the upper portion of the feet. Patala is at the bottom of the feet. Thus, the Virat form of the Lord is full of all planetary systems. Others may divide the whole planetary system into three divisions, namely the lower planetary systems on the legs up to Earth, the middle planetary systems on the navel, and the upper planetary systems, Swarloka, from the chest to the head of the Supreme Personality. Lord Brahma said, this is in chapter 6, it's titled Purusha Sukta, confirmed. He continues the description of the Virāt-Rūpa. The mouth of the Virat Purusha, the universal form of the Lord, is the generating center of the voice, and the controlling deity is fire. Again, we are seeing similar descriptions as what we saw in chapter 1, based on Shukadev Goswami's explanation. So here also we can see how the Virāt-Rūpa is related to the 24 elements. So the 24 elements are the raw materials which were created in the as part of the creation of the Mahatattva, which we saw last week. So the Virāt-Rūpa is the subsequent creation, which uses all those, the output of those creations. His skin and 6 other layers are the generating centers of the Vedic kings, and his tongue is the productive center of different foodstuff and delicacies for offering to the demigods, the forefathers, and the general mass of people. His 2 nostrils are the generating centers of our breathing and all other airs. His smelling powers generate the Ashwini Kumara demigods and all kinds of medicinal herbs, and his breathing energies produce different kinds of fragrance. This also we saw being described in the earlier verses. His eyes are the generating centers of all kinds of forms, and they glitter and illuminate. His eyeballs are like the sun and the heavenly planets. His ears hear from all sides and are receptacles for all the Vedas, and his sense of hearing is the generating center of the sky and of all kinds of sound. Again, we can see the elements like the gross element sky, the subtle element sound, being associated to the Virāt-Rūpa. His bodily surface is the breeding ground for the active principles of everything and for all kinds of auspicious opportunities. His skin, like the moving air, is the generating center for all kinds of sense of touch and is the place for performing all kinds of sacrifice. The hairs on his body are the cause of all vegetation, particularly of those trees which are required as ingredients for sacrifice. The hairs on his head and face are a reservoir for the clouds, and his nails are the breeding ground of electricity, stones, and iron ores. The Lord's arms are the productive fields for the great demigods and other leaders of the living entities who protect the general mass. Thus, the 4 steps of the Lord are the shelter for the upper, lower, and heavenly planets, as well as for all that we need. His lotus feet serve as protection from all kinds of fear. So previously, we were looking at the descriptions related to the gross and subtle elements, the 5 gross and 5 subtle elements. Now we are seeing the karma indriyas like hands and legs. From the Lord's genitals originate water, semen, genetives, rain, and the procreators. His genitals are the cause of a pleasure that counteracts the distress of begetting. O Narada, the evacuating outlet of the new universal form of the Lord, is the abode of the controlling deity of death, Mitra, and the evacuating hole and the rectum of the Lord is the place of envy, misfortune, death, hell, etc. So we saw the karma indriyas, hands and legs, now genitals and the evacuating outlet. The back of the Lord is the place for all kinds of frustration and ignorance, as well as for immorality. From his veins flow the great rivers and rivulets, and on his bones are stacked the great mountains. The impersonal feature of the Lord is the abode of great oceans, and his belly is the resting place for the materially annihilated living entities. So this is how the living entities merge into him after annihilation. Once the material creation is annihilated, at the end of the cycle, the living entities merge into the Lord. His heart is the abode of the subtle material bodies of living beings. Thus, it is known by the intelligent class of men. Also, the consciousness of that great personality is the abode of religious principles. Mine, yours, and those of the four bachelors, Sanaka, Sanatana, Sanatkumara, and Sanandana, the four Kumaras. That consciousness is also the abode of truth and transcendental knowledge. So we also saw, apart from the karma indriyas, even the intelligence, mind, and consciousness are being mentioned as part of the Virāt-Rūpa. Beginning from me, Brahma, down to you, and Bhava, Shiva, all the great sages who were born before you, the demigods, demons, nagas, the human beings, the birds, beasts, as well as the reptiles, and all the phenomenal manifestations of the universes, namely the planets, stars, asteroids, luminaries, lightning, thunder, and the inhabitants of the different planetary systems, namely the Gandharvas, Apsaras, Yakshas, Rakshas, Bhutaganas, Uragas, Pashus, Pitas, Siddhas, Vidyadharas, Charanas, and all other different varieties of living entities, including the birds, beasts, trees, and everything that be, are all covered by the universal form of the Lord at all times, namely past, present, and future, although he is transcendental to all of them, eternally existing in a form not exceeding 9 inches. So this is also quite similar to the description we saw earlier. Brahma himself acknowledges that all these creations exist as part of the Virāt-Rūpa, and that's why he says that he merely discovers what has been created by the Supreme Lord. The sun illuminates both internally and externally by expanding its radiation. Similarly, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by expanding its universal form, maintains everything in the creation, both internally and externally. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the controller of immortality and fearlessness, and he is transcendental to death and the fruitive actions of the material world. O Narada, O Brahmana, it is therefore difficult to measure the glories of the Supreme Person. So clearly we can see that since the Supreme Person is transcendental to the three modes of material nature, therefore he is transcendental to all other aspects related to the material world. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is to be known as the supreme reservoir of all material opulences by the 1/4 of his energy in which all the living entities exist. Deathlessness, fearlessness, and freedom from the anxieties of old age and disease exist in the kingdom of God, which is beyond the 3 higher planetary systems and beyond the material coverings. So these two verses, 2:6:19 and 2:6:20, are quite important because they describe regarding the entire kingdom of God. 1/4 of the kingdom of God represents the material world. So it is stated in this verse 2:6:19, Padeshu. Padeshu meaning 1/4 of the entire kingdom of God consists of the material world, and Padatraya in 2:6:20. Padatraya means 3/4. So 3/4 of the kingdom of God belongs to the spiritual world. So it is stated here, deathlessness, fearlessness, and freedom from the anxieties of old age and disease exists in the kingdom of God, which is beyond the 3 higher planetary systems and beyond the material coverings. So beyond the material world is the spiritual world, where there is deathlessness, fearlessness, and freedom from anxieties. Like the Vaikuntha planets are known as places where there is no anxiety. So in 2:6:20 stated, the spiritual world, which consists of 3/4 of the Lord's energy, is situated beyond this material world. So the material world is 1/4, the spiritual world is 3/4, and it is especially meant for those who will never be reborn. Others who are attached to family life and who do not strictly follow celibacy vows must live within the 3 material worlds. So the 3 material worlds referring to the upper, middle, and lower worlds, still belonging to the 1/4 of the kingdom of God. So Brahma continues to explain to Narada, although I am known as the great Brahma, perfect in the disciplic succession of Vedic wisdom, and although I have undergone all austerities and am an expert in mystic powers and self-realization, and although I am recognized as such by the great forefathers of the living entities who offer me respectful obeisances, still I cannot understand him, the Lord, the very source of my birth. So in the beginning of chapter 5, Narada Muni expresses his curiosity to know the object of devotion for Lord Brahma, despite acknowledging the position of Brahma as the supreme creator. Narada Muni kind of acknowledges that Brahma is the topmost creator. However, he is curious to know more about who is the inspiration for Brahma when he saw that Brahma himself is involved in great austerities. So Brahma explains all the aspects about the Supreme Lord, especially regarding the Virāt-Rūpa in chapter 5 and 6. And then he, in the concluding verses of chapter 6 of the second canto, Brahma himself says that though he is regarded as the topmost creator, still he himself is unable to understand the Supreme Lord. Therefore, it is best for me to surrender unto his feet, which alone can deliver one from the miseries of repeated birth and death. Such surrender is all auspicious and allows one to perceive all happiness. Even the sky cannot estimate the limits of its own expansion. So what can others do when the Lord himself is unable to estimate his own limits? We can also recall from the 10th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. The 10th chapter talks about in chapter 10 of Gita, Krishna talks about his various opulences. So towards the end of the chapter, Krishna says that all that I've explained to you is only a portion of my opulences. My opulences are actually infinite. So whatever I've explained to you is just like a spark of my total opulence. However, Krishna himself acknowledges that his opulences are infinite. So that's what Brahma also says about the total power of Krishna. So we can see that Shukadev Goswami explained regarding the Virāt-Rūpa to Parikshit Maharaj in the first chapter of second canto. Then Brahma explains in greater detail regarding the Virāt-Rūpa to Narada Muni in chapter 5 and 6. But towards the concluding verses, Brahma himself says that though he expertly gives the descriptions regarding the Virāt-Rūpa, but he also admits to his frailties where he is unable to understand the Supreme Lord completely. Therefore, he himself admits that it is best to surrender unto the lotus feet of the Lord. So as we know, Brahma is the topmost living entity, the topmost Jiva Tattva, who resides at the topmost planet in the material world. That is one aspect of Brahma. But if we look at our parampara, the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, in terms of the parampara itself, Brahma is the origin, like the topmost Acharya. Of course, Krishna is the source of the knowledge, but Brahma is like our topmost Acharya who imparts knowledge to Narada Muni, and then Narada Muni imparts the knowledge to Vyasadeva, and our parampara starts in that manner. So the topmost Acharya in our parampara says that it is best to surrender to the lotus feet of the Lord. And also in chapter 11 of Gita, after seeing the Virāt-Rūpa, Arjuna says, after seeing this universal form, which I've never seen before, I'm gladdened, but at the same time, my mind is disturbed with fear. Therefore, please bestow your grace upon me and reveal again your form as the personality of Godhead, O Lord of Lords, O abode of the universe. O universal form, O thousand-armed Lord, I wish to see you in your four-armed form, with helmeted head and with club, wheel, conch, and lotus flower in your hands. Shankha Chakra, Gada Padma, I long to see you in that form. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, My dear Arjuna, happily have I shown you by my internal potency the Supreme Universal Form within the material world. No one before you has ever seen this primal form, unlimited and full of glaring effulgence. O best of the Kuru warriors, no one before you has ever seen this universal form of mine. For neither by studying the Vedas, nor by performing sacrifices, nor by charity, nor by pious activities, nor by severe penances, can I be seen in this form in the material world. So Krishna expanded his special mercy to Arjuna, not just to impart the knowledge of the Gita, but also to reveal the universal form. You have been perturbed and bewildered by seeing this horrible feature of mine. Now let it be finished. My devotee, be free again from all disturbances. With a peaceful mind, you can now see the form you desire. Sanjaya said to Dhritarashtra, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, having spoken thus to Arjuna, displayed his real four-armed form and at last showed his two-armed form, thus encouraging the fearful Arjuna. So, after showing the Virāt-Rūpa, Krishna showed the four-armed form as per Arjuna's wish, and at last showed the original two-armed form, the Swayam-Rūpa. When Arjuna thus saw Krishna in his original form, he said, O Janardana, seeing this human-like form, so very beautiful, I am now composed in mind, and I am restored to my original nature. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, My dear Arjuna, this form of mine you are now seeing is very difficult to behold. Even the demigods are ever seeking the opportunity to see this form, which is so dear. So the original personal form of Krishna is the form that is dearmost to all pure devotees. Despite seeing the Virāt-Rūpa, Arjuna was only disturbed in his mind, and it came to a point where he wanted to see the original two-handed form of Krishna in the end. So that was the mood of a pure devotee. Despite his curiosity to see the universal form, he was like driven again to see the two-handed form. The form you are seeing with your transcendental eyes cannot be understood simply by studying the Vedas, nor by undergoing serious penances, nor by charity, nor by worship. It is not by these means that one can see me as I am. My dear Arjuna, only by undivided devotional service can I be understood as I am, standing before you, and can thus be seen directly. Only in this way can you enter into the mysteries of my understanding. So after revealing the universal form to Arjuna, Krishna also concludes by saying that only by devotional service can a devotee understand Krishna as he is, based on his original form, as the original personality of Godhead. So this is also similar to what Brahma told Narada in the concluding verses of chapter 6 of the second canto. Brahma also said that despite him being able to give so much details about the Virāt-Rūpa of the Lord, he still admitted to his frailties about being unable to understand the Lord completely, and therefore he said that surrendering to the lotus feet of the Lord is the best solution. And that is what is being said by Krishna to Arjuna in at the end of chapter 11. And therefore, despite knowing all these details about material nature, Mahatattva, and also the Virāt-Rūpa, we should still intensify our devotional service so that we can go to Goloka, back to Godhead. So that's all for today's session. For the past 3 weeks, we have been covering various aspects related to Prakriti. So in upcoming weeks, we'll look at the other subject matters of the Gita. So thank you for attending. Any questions?
So far, okay, Prabhu. I'll listen to the recording again because one time cannot absorb 100%. So listen again to the recording.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you,
Uh,
Prabhu.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
Nicely explained. It's very nicely explained. It's just that it's quite long, you see, so I cannot remember everything. So I have to listen to the recording again. Then it's I absorb more.
Okay. So, thank you.
Yeah,
Hare
thank
Krishna.
you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna, Prabhu.